I'm going to use this mic because I'm going to be coughing and sneezing and sniffling a lot throughout my talk. I came down with the flu on my way here, and so it's going to be sounding a bit rougher than I want to. Before I start, thanks again to Drew and Matt for organizing the conference. It's been really fantastic being here, even though I was sick for most of the time. Drew, it's actually taken Drew quite a while to convince me to come up, not because I don't like being at conferences or because I don't like coming up here, but simply because I prefer hiding behind my screen and getting some work done instead of standing in front of a big crowd and talking about myself. But I'm here now, and you're going to know all about me at the end of this. So, my name is Kai. I'm originally from Germany, but I've been living in Australia the last 8 to 10 years. And for about just as long, I've been designing websites for clients in the US, in Germany, and in Australia. And about around mid-2011, I made a decision to become a publisher of a print magazine, so a completely different career. And I'm here today to talk a bit about that decision and what preceded that decision. And then I'm going to take you guys through a bit of a simplified step-by-step process to show you how I put the first issue together. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk a bit about a few things that I've learned over the last 2 years putting the magazine out. I'm going to start with 2 quotes. The first one is by Seth Godin, which probably most of you know. He's talking about dancing on the edge of finished. And I'm going to read this out to you. It's a bit of a long one, so please bear with me. Before, when your shift was done, you were finished. When the inbox was empty, when the forms were processed, you could stop. Now there's always one more tweet to make, one more post to write. There's one more bit of email, one more comment you can respond to. If you want to, you can be never finished. And that's the dance. Facing a sea of infinity, it's easy to despair, sure that you will never reach dry land, never have the sense of accomplishment of saying, I'm done. For the marketer, the freelancer, and the entrepreneur, the challenge is to level set, to be comfortable with the undone, with the cycle of never ending. We are trained to finish our homework, our P's and our chores. Today, we're never finished. And I'm going to jump straight to the second one, and that's pretty much it then, with quotes. It's by Craig Mott, and he's describing something he calls digitally thin. And he says, there's a feeling of thinness that I believe many of us grapple with working digitally. The more the entirety of the creation process lives in bits, the less solid the things we are creating feel in our minds. Put in more concrete terms, a folder with one item looks and feels just like a folder with 1 billion items. And that's pretty much what I was thinking about when I looked at this client folder of mine in June 2011. And as you can see, I've been working on this for quite a while. There's a lot of revisions and relaunches and updates in there. And I was looking at this thing, and I thought, it took me such a long time to actually put all this stuff in there and work so hard to produce all these files, and I could basically delete them within a couple of seconds. And if I wasn't the one deleting it, surely it would disappear into the ether that is the internet after a while, because as you all know, we work in a very ephemeral environment where whatever we put out there lives as long as the next release cycle or the next update or the next trend or the next acquisition. And so there was this never-ending creation process with no clear sense of accomplishment for me. If you compare that, for example, to, say, a carpenter who works a few months on a beautiful chest of drawers, once he's done, he's got this beautiful piece of art that he puts in his showroom or in his home, and it's there for everyone to see, for the next generations to come as well. And so I was missing that link to the real world, producing something of legacy, I guess. And I also started to feel the pressure of keeping up with things and being on top of the latest technology, the latest frameworks, the latest libraries. And starting to have a fear of losing my game as well. And so I decided to take a break. I said goodbye to my clients. I bought an around the world ticket and started traveling a little bit. I went to the US, to Europe, to Mexico, Japan. And I just spent a lot of time basically reflecting on myself, on the work that I do, and on our industry as well, I guess. And as much as I tried to switch off and get away from digital, I had my phone with me. I tried to reconnect with people that I knew through Twitter and Facebook. So as you all know, probably this weekend actually, you probably met face-to-face a few people that you've never really seen before, but you know really intimately almost through Twitter and Facebook. And so that's what I was trying to do. And so many people suddenly seemed a lot more human, a lot more approachable to me. And apps and sites that I've been using for so many years became real through the faces that I met. And there's this, to give you an example as a story, there's a guy who followed me on Twitter quite a while ago. I didn't know him, I didn't follow him. But I happened to actually say something quite negatively about one of the sites on Twitter. I basically ranted about something, a bad user experience or something. And so eventually I followed him as well, and I met up with him during my traveling. And he told me about that day that I talked badly about his design. And I felt instantly bad about that because there you are sitting on the table with a guy that you basically dissed on Twitter. And that made me realize that we often see the interface and we don't really see the face that sort of builds the interface. And there's this disconnect, even though everyone's talking about we're all interconnected and we're super connected, there's this disconnect between the humans and the actual, the software and the actual humans that make that interface. So I met a lot of people, I heard a lot of exciting stories. It was really cool to see what's happening in the background of some of the bigger companies. And I generally, the attitude that I found, the general attitude was that of excitement to be in this industry, of course, because we're all really excited about the opportunities we have these days. But a lot of people seem to have the same problem that I had, and that was that of digital oversaturation, not keeping up, not being able to follow everything. And building and maintaining real-world connections seem to get harder and harder as our industry is sort of getting messier and louder and bigger and is growing up. And it's getting more competitive as well. When I wasn't connecting with people, I spent a lot of time in shops like this. I'm not sure if you can see this. It's a magazine shop in Berlin. It's called Do You Read Me? And you should definitely check it out if you're in Berlin. It's one of the best magazine shops, but it's also one of the best sources of inspiration offline. And so I've always been a big magazine fan. I really like the linear way of telling a story in a magazine. It's quite a one-dimensional sort of way of exploring content. Because with a magazine you have a front cover and you have a back cover, and what happens in between these two covers is entirely up to the publisher, because he can build this really cool story and build up content throughout the magazine that leads to a certain theme or topic. Compared to a website where you start reading a blog post and you click on a link and 5 minutes later you find yourself, I don't know, watching farting cat videos because you clicked on a link in there, right? So that's sort of multidimensional, where you sort of jump from content to content to content. And magazines are products that are defined by real materials and by that tactile experience. So with every single magazine has the ink that you can smell, has the paper that you can feel, has a different finish, different binding. And so every single magazine has a real unique character. And if you look at your bookshelf, all these things on your bookshelf have their single unique characters. There's a guy who can actually explain this much better than me, and his name is Peter Aramian, and he says, "A magazine asks you to pause for a moment, smell it, touch it, examine it. It offers a nuanced activism that resists the non-stop anxieties of everyday life." Non-stop anxieties of everyday life. Doesn't that sound familiar to a lot of you? So I came home, I unpacked my bags and I looked at the stack of magazines that I bought. And I knew back then that I wanted to make something off the screen. I wanted to produce something for myself, and I wanted to prove to myself that I can actually make a real product, not just something that lives in this digital world somewhere. And I still felt very much inspired and connected to the web community, because I've been doing a lot of traveling and I met a lot of people. And so there was this desire to facilitate more of that humanization process as well. So meeting people, meeting face to face, and I really appreciate actually getting to know who's actually working behind those websites. And so I decided to combine both in the form of a magazine, and I would call it Offscreen. So the first step in making a magazine is to figure out how to make a magazine. And so I went online and, as we do, searched indie publishing, how do you make a magazine? I couldn't find anything. I went on Amazon and bought a couple of books on indie publishing, and bought them, read them in a couple of days, and wasn't much wiser afterwards, to be honest. Really outdated. And so I went through the magazines that I had on my shelf and looked up the publishers and the editors, and contacted some of those guys and said, how do you make a magazine? And most of the time the answer was pretty much the same. They said, Well, Kai, you have to have an editor, you have to have a team of photographers, of writers, of photographers, you have to have an art director, you need to have a pre-press person. It's good to have an advertising team that gets the ads in and sells the magazine to the people, and then you have to have distributors who actually get the magazine into the shops, and so on and so on. And they all told me, look, it's a crap load of work, the insane deadlines, and the money is real shit. And there I was, trying to make a magazine. I had no experience in writing, no experience in editing. And the last time I used InDesign was to design an invite to celebrate the end of my puberty. English isn't even my first language. And so talking to all these publishers wasn't, I guess, the best idea. They really tried to be helpful and really tried to be encouraging, but most of the time it was quite the opposite. So at the same time, though, I was sort of contacting printers and distributors to figure out how much it would cost me to put together an issue. And I came up, after a while, I came up with a figure, and as you do these days, you take that figure and you put it on Kickstarter. And as you can see, I didn't reach the funding goal. I didn't do too badly either, 12,000 out of 16,000. There's a lot of reasons why I think it didn't succeed. One of the reasons are self-inflicted, I think. About 2 weeks before the funding goal ended, I started to lock down the higher pledge tiers so people could not give me $400, $500, $600. And the reason for that is if you look at the backer number, I had 280, or at the time 230 or 40 backers. And if you know anything about print, you know that you have to produce something in high volume to get the per item cost quite far down. So if you produce 300 magazines, a magazine is going to cost you, $15, $20, or $30 even. If you produce a few thousand, 3,000 or so magazines, then the per issue cost is going to go down to like $1 or $2 or $3. And so it didn't seem viable to just produce a magazine with 250 backers, even though I would probably get the money. And so I started locking down high pledge tiers, so people could not give me too much money, basically. And I wanted to have more backers with little money. Obviously, that wasn't a good idea. But also, when I first put that idea up on Kickstarter, I had a different concept and different idea about the magazine, because I was such a newbie, I didn't really know what went into making a magazine. And so while the campaign was going, I figured out a lot of those loose ends. And I guess at the end of the funding period, I had a different concept, different idea of the magazine. So I wasn't too unhappy that it didn't succeed, but of course I had this really weird moment. This limbo situation where I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I fund it myself, or should I just go back to doing more freelance work? I know there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurial risk-taking in our industry, and I never really knew what that meant and I'm sure that there's lots of entrepreneurs that take massive risks with startups, and I'm sure this magazine is tiny compared to that. But for most of us, most of us are developers or designers, and we basically start a project with maybe just ourselves, like Drew, or we buddy up with someone else, and then we start a project, and then it gets sort of successful, and then we build upon that, and we don't really need to take money out, or at least not in the first stages. But I was sitting there and looked at the quotes that I had from my printer, and they were up to like $16,000 to $20,000 or so. And that's when I realized that that actually that's what they talk about when they talk about risk-taking. And so it took me a while to actually figure out what to do, but eventually I decided to focus on the rewards and forget about the risk for once, and decided to go ahead anyway. Now I'm going to talk you guys through the different steps of putting the first issue together. And of course, I've categorized these steps or put them in different headlines, but it doesn't happen chronologically. It happens sort of all over the place. So content is obviously one of the more important things if you have a publication. And I knew from the get-go that I didn't want to have just another computer magazine with tutorials or screenshots or DVDs in the back. I wanted to make something different and focus entirely on the human side of things. I wanted to show the people that actually work in the background and make everything happen. And I wanted to tell the less obvious human stories that hide behind the interfaces that we use every day. And I wanted to capture the stories of these people, and I wanted to capture the excitement that comes out of the web community these days, and sort of present it in a more tangible format. So freeze frame it onto real paper so that they could be enjoyed, not just today and tomorrow, but maybe 2 years or 5 years down the track. So the concept I came up with was to have 6 lengthy and quite intimate interviews with founders, developers, or designers as the core of the issue, of every single issue, and then have smaller features with lesser known faces in between them. And people always ask me, especially people not part of our industry, they ask me how I actually find contributors. And there's no secret to it. I just spend time on Twitter and Facebook and on blogs, just seeing who's got something interesting to say, and then get in touch with them. And generally, people in our industry are quite accessible, which doesn't mean that they're responsive. I usually divide people into 2 groups. There's that group that is on top of the emails, and then there's the group that hate the inbox. And you figure out quite quickly once you contact someone what group they're in. It's quite paradoxical actually if you think about it. Like we're all just an email away from each other, but because now we get so many emails, it's become harder to actually reach someone. Anyway, I put together a list of folks that I wanted to have in the first issue, and started to contact them and make sure that deadlines didn't collide, and then eventually had a confirmed list of people that would be the contributors of the first issue. And this is I guess the most important document of any issue or any magazine really. It's called, or I call it a content plan. Some people call it a flat plan. And back in the days when you look at photos where, I don't know, Vogue magazine or so, they have a wall of printouts where they show you every single page of the magazine. That's my wall. So it's a spreadsheet that I keep online, and as you see, it's like a bird's eye view of the magazine. Then you got the column on the left that shows you the page numbers, and then you got the features, and then you got the contributors, and then it allows me to sort of check off all the things that I need to get done to get a page done in the magazine. And it's a quite messy process, and at this point, especially with the first issue, I started adding rows to that document, and so I think in the first week or so I had like 260 rows, and I suddenly realized, oh shit, I have to fill 260 pages. And so I started culling down and ended up having 112 pages. Once I had my list with contributors, I started creating all these Google documents, shared Google documents. So every contributor would get a Google document with instructions and guidelines at the top, and then of course room at the bottom to actually contribute their piece. And that worked out really well because I can now go in there and edit and comment and give feedback as people are actually contributing things. And that's definitely the stressful and most challenging part of putting the issue together, because you work with like 60 or so different people and you have 60 or more documents open all the time, and you have to follow up with everyone, you have to remind everyone of deadlines, you have to sometimes replace people that drop out. And so that's definitely the most stressful period. And you also it constantly reminds me this part of the magazine making that the success of the issue is entirely up to the contributors. It's not really up to me. Like if contributors don't follow up and don't actually get their stuff in, I'm screwed. And then once I have about 90–95% of the content, I take all that content and merge it into one master document, which in the end probably has about 40 to 50,000 words, and that's where I work with my contributor, with my proofreader or my editor, sub-editor, to go through everything and check on typos and grammar, and I change everything into British English. Give everything a nice flow and make sure that everything's correct. And so now let's assume we have all the content. That's when we move into the layout part of it. And of course, for the first issue, that was the exciting bit for me, because I finally could actually see how everything works together as a whole. Of course, I have a massive stack of magazines at home that I can fall back on as a source of inspiration. These are just a few that I picked up over the years, and that I guess influenced the magazine most heavily. I knew that I wanted to have a classic approach to the magazine design. I didn't want to have anything too fancy. I wanted to have a calm reading experience, because I want people to actually enjoy it when they get away from the screen and not be distracted by too many overly playful graphical elements. And I wanted it to be sophisticated and thoughtful in style, but at the same time I wanted to have be down to earth and approachable and friendly, pretty much like our web community itself. And to give you an example, The Weekender there in the middle is a magazine that I picked up in Berlin a couple of years ago, and when I found it, I opened it up and I fell in love with the stock that the magazine used. It's this really beautiful natural stock made of 100% of recycling paper, and it's got these really nice these bits of wood and old paper in it, and it feels really natural. And so I ended up contacting the editor, and he put me in touch with his printer, and then he put me in touch with the paper mill, and I figured out what the manufacturer was, and I ended up using the same paper. Just to give you an idea of how all these different loose ends came together. Okay, and then at some point I realized I don't know anything about InDesign, and that's not a good base to start with. And so I found this website, lynda.com. It's been around for a while. It's not so much not so popular as not as popular as I guess Treehouse and all the other e-learning platforms, simply because they don't have much web-related stuff, I think. But anyway, they have a lot of tutorials and video footage of people learning InDesign, learning Adobe products. And so I spent about 2.5 weeks just watching every single video they had on typography, pre-press, InDesign, publishing, and just try to get myself up to scratch with the programs that I needed to actually make the magazine. And that's when I also discovered the intricacies of typography. I grew up or I became a web designer at an age where we had like 5 fonts to choose from, and now, with Typekit and with FontFont and other web services, we have obviously more options and more choice. But there's still so much we as web designers don't know about typography, about typesetting and laying out type on a screen or on a piece of paper. It's amazing. Like I don't know much about it still. I still learn with every single issue I put out, but there's so much to learn about typography. Talking about typography, it eventually came to the choice paradox of choosing fonts for the magazine. And I think it was the biggest choice paradox I've ever had in my life. If you go to websites like FontShop or myfonts.com, you have like millions or hundreds of thousands of fonts that are all amazing, they all look beautiful, and how are you going to make a decision? I hate making decisions. And so in the process of finding the 2 fonts that I wanted to use in the magazine, I bought a lot of font licenses, because the only way you can test them is you buy the license, you install it, you throw some text edit in InDesign, and then you print it out, because you really want to know what it feels like and what it looks like on a piece of paper. And so I did that a lot of time, like bought a license, printed it out, changed the font size, changed the leading, and printed it out again. Until I came up with those 2, Cyclone by Heffler and Fro Jones, and Kaluna by, I think it's pronounced Axel Jabris. And I'm still a big fan of Kaluna. It's a beautiful font, and it comes in a lot of different styles, a lot of different weights. It's got these really beautiful ligatures. And so back to InDesign, eventually I thought I would be skilled enough to come up with a master sheet or master template. And so I developed these master sheets that would be versatile enough and solid enough to throw all the different features and all the different text types and all the different photo types on it. And that was obviously a quite lengthy process as well, because you start with a 12-column grid, I think, and then you adjust margins, you adjust gutter widths, you adjust column widths, and then you print it out and you look at it and you throw it away, and then you start again with different margins, different gutter widths, different column widths. Pretty much rinse repeat until you're happy with the layout and you think that it can actually handle all the different things you want to do with the magazine. And so there was a lot of photo retouching in the background, a lot of more content editing, more following up and chasing contributors. And at some point I was able to actually, I had all the content on one side, and I had my master templates, my master sheets and InDesign on the other side, and I could actually finally start building the magazine from the first to the last page. And that took me about, I think, 3.5 weeks or so. And because we all love advertising, I thought I'd put some advertising in there. No, I'm just kidding. Unless you're a Monocle magazine or Vogue magazine, everyone hates advertising. The ads in those really glossy magazines are somehow beautiful, I guess. They're still interruptive and they're still annoying to a certain extent, but at least they look good. With indie publishing, smaller indie magazines, the problem is that you most often deal with clients or with advertisers that have a really small budget. And so the ads you get are really shit most of the time. And so I decided to come up with an idea that's less interruptive. And and I thought I actually replace advertising with sponsorships. And this is how I actually implemented it. It's a bit cut off. Basically, there are 8 pages in the center of the magazine, printed on a different paper type, and they're all presented the same way, so it's very consistent and very unified. It's a black page with the logo in the middle, the byline at the top, and the description at the bottom. And I don't want to sound too much like a salesperson, but it actually was a real win-win-win situation for everyone involved. When I first launched the issue #1, and I got a feedback back from people that received it, they all told me that, not all, but a lot of people told me that they, for the first time ever, read every single word of the magazine, including the ads or the sponsorships. And that was really interesting for me to hear, because I knew that it was less invasive and less intrusive, but it's really interesting if you think about it to see people really appreciating sponsorships if you do them right? So if you put a page or an ad in there that's trying to capture your attention and trying to jump at you, people just feel annoyed. But if you do it in a subtle way and in a beautiful way, people actually pay more attention to it. And that sort of, if you think about that, that's actually a really cool idea. So the reader was happy. The advertiser obviously was happy because, what do you want more from your ad than to actually be read and people appreciate it. And for me, of course, I get some money to actually contribute to the production cost of the magazine. Talking about production, so I am based in Berlin, in Melbourne, but I'm from Germany, so I know quite a few people in Germany as well, and I go there regularly. And when I was looking at quotes from printers, it became clear that in Melbourne, in Australia, everything is so expensive that I could never afford making a magazine in Australia. I think the cover price would have been 3 times as much if I made it in Australia. And so I contacted printers in Berlin, and surprisingly the quotes were really, really good. And so I got a few quotes, and obviously didn't go with the cheapest one, but I didn't want to go with the most expensive one either. I went with the one that was most responsive, especially to my newbie questions. There's a lot of large printers that expect you to just send them the final files and they do their thing. And finding a printer that's actually open to someone asking them really stupid questions that doesn't know anything about print, is not that easy. So I found a really, really good printer. It's called AZ Print, and it's in Berlin. And they helped me with all my newbie questions. They helped me with the pre-press stage a lot, and they helped me find the materials that I wanted to use for the magazine as well. And I wanted to use 100% sustainable materials. That was really important to me. So the paper is 100% recycled paper, and the ink is natural oil-based as well. And so I was at this point where I could take all the work that I've done over the last 6 months and export it into a PDF file. It's bizarre, isn't it? As a web designer, don't do that. Don't have a 3 gigabyte file at the end of your work. And so I had this file, and then you always find more mistakes and more issues, and you go in there and you export it again, which takes like 30 minutes. And so you have this file, and then eventually you upload it to your server, you send the printer the link, and that's really weird, because you send the link off, and then that's it. You can't go in there, you can't do any edits, there's no bug fixing, or there's no taking things offline. It's done. And so my printer, I didn't get these photos right away, they sent it to me afterwards, but they started making the magazine, I guess. Yeah, it's just some photos from the printer. And I waited and I waited and I waited. I was in Melbourne, and it took them about 2.5 to 3 weeks to print the thing, and then it took them another 2 weeks to actually send it to me to Australia. So I was pretty much camping next to my mailbox for about 4 weeks, checking every 3 hours. And it finally arrived. Yeah, it was amazing. Like, unwrapping that thing that you've worked on for 6 months was pretty much the best thing I've ever done. Excuse me. And it really felt great. I felt like that reward that I was so desperately after when I started this. And I had this really pride period where I showed it to everyone, like to my girlfriend, about 7 times a day. And eventually you look at your magazine, and then you realize that you will always look at your magazine different to everyone else. There's Carolyn Wood, who is the editor of the manual, which some of you might know. She once told me that you look at your magazine or your publication, and you see all the decisions you made, And when she told me that before I started making the magazine, I didn't really know what she meant, but looking at the magazine then, I knew exactly what she meant, because I opened the magazine and I look at page 14 where there's a comma missing, and it's there because I made a decision not to put one there, or I forgot about it. Or look at page 18 where there's a photo at the top left where it should be in the top right. And so you look at your magazine and there's all these not only issues but also things that you could have improved or you could have done better. And it's a bit of a pity because you've worked so long and you can't really enjoy the magazine as much as everyone else. So as the magazine was being made, I thought about distribution and fulfillment. And the way distribution traditionally works in publishing is that you have yourself on the right as a publisher, and then you have the retailers on the other side, and then between those two is the distributor. And what they usually do is take a bulk amount of magazines or publications, whatever, off your hands and then distribute it to as many shops as possible. And the important part here is that they don't buy it off you, they just take it off you. And of course they make a cut of whatever the cover price is, so 20% cut usually. Then the retail shops get 40%, and then you're left with about 40%. And of course, as an indie magazine who entirely relies on the cover price, that doesn't really sound viable, doesn't really sound that great, right? And but not only that, like the problem with those distributor arrangements is also that first of all they send you contracts in the Word document that's 30 pages long, and going through that feels like you're in a different century. Some of them asked me to wait for my money to be paid up to 365 days, because apparently that's how long it takes them to get all the data, all the sales numbers from all the shops, and then process them internally, and then send the final money to me in a check, like a paper check. I know that's an American thing, right? I have never signed in my life ever a paper check. I don't know how you guys do that still. And that was one thing that really bothered me. And also, what bothered me even more was that they would, so if they take 1,000 copies of you and they ended up only selling maybe 200 of them, they just destroy everything else because it's too expensive and too complicated to send all these magazines back to you. And I don't want to see my babies destroyed. So of course I decided to use my website as a main sales channel, and that's the first version. That's a more recent version. And so once the magazine was done, I contacted some of the contributors and said, look, it's done, I'm launching tomorrow, and of course they helped me get a bit of buzz going, and some of these interviewees, of course, are quite well connected, like Drew, and he tweeted it out and put a blog post up or whatever. And then, of course, there was a bit of buzz at the first couple of days, and this is a very realistic and detailed sales graph. So this is pretty much how every issue goes, and this is like the first week and a half or 2 weeks, and that's of course where you sell most of the copies of the issue. And then the smaller spikes, I guess, are when people receive the issue and they start talking about it again on Twitter or on Facebook, and sometimes blog reviews or that sort of thing. Okay, so I was getting orders, and I had this website in place, and I was using PayPal. I know everyone hates PayPal, including me, but there's not a lot of options in Australia yet. There's no Stripe in Australia yet, and so I was thinking about how I can actually manage all these orders, because let me show you this. So I came up with a system that we developed ourselves, me and a developer in Melbourne. I looked at all these different e-commerce packages and all these open source things like, I don't know, Shopify or Big Cartel and all these other open source software tools to actually handle an e-commerce site. But the problem with magazine publishing or selling magazines online is that the most important thing for magazine publishers is subscriptions, and actually be able to sell subscriptions through the website is not that easy, because what subscriptions are, at least in the case of Offscreen, is that you buy, let's say, 3 issues, and you might start with the current one, and then you have the next and the one after the next that's not out yet, and so you're basically pre-ordering products that don't even exist yet. And what you have to do once they come out, you have to sort of reopen that order and then process it again and again and again until the order basically has run out. And to actually do that and realize that wasn't that easy. And so we built this system that hooks into PayPal and gets the details there, and it works really well. I totally rely on that. And it also helps me to optimize shipping costs. So a lot of times it's cheaper to actually send several magazines as single envelopes instead of a box, because shipping boxes around the world is super expensive. And so this helps me to actually optimize shipping costs by looking at the country and where it goes and how heavy it is, and then sending it out in different envelopes and boxes. Another super important feature, I guess, is exporting orders. So once a week, usually on Monday, I go in there and export all the weekly orders that came in over the last 7 days, and export them in a certain format. And then I will take that file and send it off to my distributor, or my drop shipper, who's also in Berlin. And so they take that file, run it through their system, and then they attach these shipping labels that I made, and they print on the shipping labels the address and the postage and whatever it takes, put the magazine inside, and then ship it off. There's a whole story around that, and it took a while to actually be quite efficient with that as well, but it works now, and it's really great because it allows me to stay location independent as well, so I can start shipping things even when I'm not there. So these are the issues so far, up to issue number 5, which the last 2, 4 and 5 are on the coffee table over there, if you want to have a look. And obviously I had a format change with 4 and 5, decided to go a bit smaller so I can have more pages and still have the similar weight. Okay, don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to have a few questions. So I want to quickly talk about a few things that I've learned over the last few years. There's a lot of talk, obviously, about magazines and newspapers going out of business, and it's true, definitely true for mainstream publications that rely on sort of traditional advertising revenue. But there's never really been a better time for independent magazines. It's a new art form, really, because technology has enabled people like myself or other hobbyists to just sort of play around with it and give it a go. And so as a result, there's now more niche-specific magazines in the market than ever before. You can find a magazine on food, on fixies, on booze, on sneakers, on whatever you want, whatever your interests are. And it's great to know that this art form is not dying out, it's just evolving. And it's actually quite funny because all these mainstream publishing houses are looking at indie magazines and they're trying to figure out what they're doing right. Because we can sell, completely different volume, but we can sell magazines for $25, $30, $40, and they can't sell a newspaper that costs $1. So it's interesting. It's an interesting time to actually do something in print. I like to compare it to the vinyl industry, which has sort of undergone a renaissance in the last few years. They've sort of managed to sell more vinyl in the last 5 years than they sold before, which is pretty interesting. I'm not producing anything groundbreakingly, amazingly new with Offscreen. I mean, the content in there is similar to what you may find on websites or podcasts or blogs. But as soon as you put that content on a piece of paper and you start shipping it around the world, I figured for a lot of people it becomes real. And I'm going to tell you a little story. So in the 4th issue, there was a guy who won. So he was in the issue, obviously, he was an interviewee. And he bought a few more copies of the magazine to give to his friends and families, and And so when he gave one to his mum, it instantly made her cry because she was so proud of his success. And mind you, that's a guy who's probably a millionaire. He's traveled around the world giving talks, and he's got a massive following online. But for his mum, his success became real that moment that she saw his name on the cover of that magazine. And that's the real power, that's the emotional power that emanates from products, from real products that we're missing and longing for these days. It's a relationship with digital products. You don't have that same relationship with digital products, unfortunately. As a UI designer, I felt quite trapped sometimes and a bit limited by our technology, and you can see that both ways. Of course, constraints can be a great foundation for creativity and problem solving, and we all do that all the time. But I love the question that Drew asked yesterday at the design panel, where he said, what's the relationship between design and art, and where does problem solving come in there? With magazines, it's really a bit more towards the arts, because there's no real standards or no real boundaries, technological boundaries. I guess the technological boundaries are the printing presses, but you can really do anything with a magazine. You can do, you can produce a magazine that's a book size, or you can have a newspaper size. You can do any type of stock you want. You can have glossy or natural or thin or thick. Some magazines have photos only, some have text only, some have a different font on every single page, some have one font for the whole magazine. So it's very creative, and it's quite refreshing to break free of those technological boundaries for once, and you don't have to worry about like slow connections or small screens or old browsers, conversion rates. There are really no standards, and nothing needs to validate, and everything is Retina by default. As I told you before, I was really intimidated when I talked to publishers and called them up and said, how do you make a magazine? And not only that, I was intimidated by the actual magazine as well. I looked at the magazines that I had at home, and I thought, how can I produce, as one person, produce something that beautiful? And also intimidated by the amount of work, obviously, that goes into it. There was also a massive fear of financial failure, sitting on a few thousand copies that nobody wants. I guess even greater is the fear of creative failure, in which case I'd be sitting on a few thousand copies that I don't want. So the need for perfection is sort of a source of anxiety. It really creates a lot of self-doubt and leads to a lot of inertia, and you simply just don't get started, or we don't even consider it. But once you realize that perfection is actually not so much that final goal, it's more about like getting there, like making it more perfect, more perfect, more perfect all the time. Once you realize that, you can make a first step and you can build upon that. Sounds easy, doesn't it? When I got my first issue, I had this really almost celebratory moment of pride, and I've done this, amazing. But that sort of feeling got quickly replaced by a feeling of horror and shock, because I realized, shit, I have to make another one. And so as a publisher, you realize that after one issue is always before the next. And so as much as I tell you now that this is all amazing and it's the best experience ever, it's always a bit of an infinite struggle. Because you pretty much have to start with a new product with every single issue, and you have to invent a new issue from scratch. And things don't get much easier, they just get a bit more manageable. I sometimes compare it to giving birth, as much as I can as a guy. A lot of sweat and a lot of pain goes in there until it comes out and everyone's happy. The only problem is that I get pregnant every 3 months. It's really interesting breaking into a new industry that you know nothing about. So as a web person, I guess I bring with me my problem-solving skills, and as a newbie, you're quite naive, and you don't understand why things are the way they are, of course, and you look at things that seem a bit broken, and you think, that's just fucking stupid. Why isn't there a better way? And so when I tell other publishers about how I do things with Offscreen and how I sort of figure it out as I went along, it's really funny. They usually just go, hang on, so you don't have ads or you don't have distributors, and how do you manage all these things? And it's really great being that rebel or that misfit and uncover inefficiencies with a bit of dumb naivety. You know what? I'm going to jump that one. I'm going to skip that one too because I'm running out of time. I think in this room we're all idea junkies. I think we're all addicted to ideas. And there's so many opportunities out there now for us as an industry that is really hard to pick or to make a choice and pick one option. And it's even harder once you pick one to actually stick with it. So building or chipping away on building a great product and not being distracted by other people's success costs a lot of energy. We've become quite quick to call something a failure because we are always surrounded by so much success. But I believe that success has a lot to do with persistence and patience and discipline, and looking beyond today and tomorrow, and not going with every single trend that comes out. Because real focus has long-term rewards, which brings me to my last point, which is recognizing success. I often get congratulated on the success of Offscreen, and it took me a long time to realize and admit to myself that I actually am, in fact, successful. But how do we measure success? It certainly, my bank account statement certainly doesn't give it away. Welcome to publishing. But once we fulfilled our basic needs, and once we, taken care of our family, and once we can go on trips and go out for dinner once in a while, how do we actually measure success? Taking ownership of Offscreen really made me appreciate what I do for a living. Yes, it consumes a lot of time and a lot of nerves, and a lot of sweat goes in it. But every single tweet, every single comment, every single email that I get talking positively about Offscreen really makes it worthwhile and compensates for all the hard work. But I still find it really hard to believe that there are actually a few thousand people out there that spend their hard-earned cash on buying something that I produced. And not only that, they actually go to extreme lengths and tell other people, friends and colleagues, about the magazine too, and encourage them to buy it too, because they think it has a positive impact on their lives. And knowing that I have a positive impact on someone else's life by just simply doing what I like doing and by executing this really vague idea that I had, that's the best feeling in the world. And that feeling, maybe that feeling, that's success. Thank you. Actually, yep. Okay.
All right, so anybody have questions right here? Hey, great talk. You did well.
Thanks.
So I know you already talked about this a bit in your talk, but could you talk a bit more about choosing and working with printers?
And then you sort of look at other magazines as well. I guess when you produce something in print, you have a few things that you can fall back on as a resource of inspiration, I guess. And you look at them. You talk to a printer. You have to have a printer that is good in communicating with you. And it's obviously better if you have a local printer who's sort of next to you that you can just pop by and say, look, this is what I want to do. Can you help me? So establishing that rapport is actually really important, and it was I could only do that when I was in my third issue, when I actually went over to Berlin and met them in person. So I guess the most important thing is having a good rapport and having a good communication channel that you can contact them quickly and ask questions. As I said in my talk, asking newbie questions was really important, or having them answer newbie questions was important to me. But other than that, I mean, learning stuff like typography and InDesign and how you actually export files, that sort of stuff, and managing colors, which is still a mystery to me. All this stuff you sort of learn as you go along. And as I said before, issue number 1, 2, and also 3. I think 3 was the best of the first 3, but 1 and 2 was definitely not as good as I wanted it to be. And I look at them now. I mean, the first 2 are sold out. 3 is there's a few more available, but it's going to sell out in 4 weeks. But the first 2, I'm happy they're sold out because I feel bad giving them to people now because there's so many things in there that I don't like. Sorry, it's not an easy answer.
I know. Did you ever meet with your printers, like in person?
Yeah. I spent a year in Berlin, came back in April, and I actually was there for the print of 3 and 4. Yeah.
Thanks.
So truly inspiring, amazing. Thanks. Just great work. I have a question about photography. I noticed that most of the magazine has this amazing, beautiful images. Did you work with a photographer? Like, did you travel and took these pictures yourself? Or tell us a little more about that.
It's pretty much like everything else in the magazine. So I don't travel, I don't go there, unfortunately, and take everything myself. With the interviews, it's usually most of the people in the magazine are creatives, right? They have creative friends, they have colleagues that are either designers or photographers or developers or someone in the creative field. And the way I approach it, usually I ask them when I first contact them, so do you know a photographer that can help us out, a friend, or even your wife, sometimes even taken by their partners. And so that's the first option that I try to get to. And then if they say, oh, sorry, I don't know anyone, then I will either go through friends or Twitter friends and ask, do you know someone that's there that can actually help us out? And there's a lot of unique things about Offscreen, like, for example, that the content is not written by authors, so I don't actually pay people to contribute to the magazine. It's all sort of first-person experience. And so I guess similar with photographers, I don't really have a massive budget, so I'll rely on people to actually help me either by having good rates or by them having contacts that can actually help us out. And you'd be surprised, once you actually produce a print magazine, once it's actually a real product, as I said before, people are a lot more open to the idea of doing something just for the fun of it because they get a copy and they're really happy about it. And I don't want to sound cheap now, but you know, it's sort of with indie publishing, you rely on those sort of people because otherwise it's just not doable. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot. Like, super inspiring to hear your story and how Offscreen came together. I'm a big fan. Super good stuff. I have 2 questions, if that's cool. First, how do you choose who to feature? And like, I mean, you guys do a great job, and it's also on the flip side of that, like, how would someone go about suggesting someone to feature or recommending someone?
It's always hard to, when you talk about the interviewees, so the six people that are interviewed in every issue, I try to sort of have a balance between people that are quite popular and that will drive. I find them interesting as well, but with popular people always drive traffic and drive sales, of course. But you also don't want to become a magazine that's sort of just featuring all the people that have been interviewed a million times online, right? So I try to have a balance between people that are well known and are well known online, and also people that are interesting that have not been overexposed yet. And so I guess sometimes it's really scheduled and planned, and I know exactly who I want to have in the magazine, and I just contact them or ask people to introduce me. And sometimes I'm freaking out because it's getting really late, and I just sort of ask someone, who do you think is a good interview person, and then they just point me to it. There's no rule really, but sorry, what was your second question?
I was just curious, like, how someone would go about recommending.
Sure, you can. I mean, if you go to the website and send an email to that email address, that's just me, so I'll get all the emails. If you recommend someone, I'm always happy. I've got a massive list of interesting, I think it's called interesting people to contact. And there's like, you know, a list of 100 people or 150 people or so. And so I go through that list every single time I want to make a new feature and look at who these people are and what sort of feature they might fit into. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Hey, I have a question about execution. I don't know if you heard Josh's talk.
Great talk, yeah.
Yeah, it was great, right? And so my first part of the question is, how long did it take you to get from like the idea to the first magazine? And then because that, you know, he wrote a book in 3 days. It probably didn't take you 3 days. It sounds like you had to go to Germany months, right? What were the things that kind of kept you executing? Because it's easy to kind of veer off, you know, after some time, and if a printer is unresponsive. I'm sure you saw a lot of hurdles. So what were the things that you kind of found were like your execute moments in that time frame? And it'd be great to know like how long that actually took.
Yeah. Yeah, again, Josh and Drew, that's amazing, like a book in a week. You know, I think it took about, I guess with coming to that conclusion that I want to do it, that took a while. But once you decide that you want to go for it, I guess it took me about 5 months or so, 5-6 months. It takes me less time now with between issues, not because it's become easier, but because I know what I do and what I want to do. With the first issue, you sort of play around with ideas, and you have to come up with a design, and you know, obviously that's, you're not doing that with every single issue. I guess, yeah, you're right. It takes a long, and that's what I said in my second last slide, I think, about staying motivated, and that's obviously what Josh's and Drew's book and talk was a lot about. That's the key issue, to sort of keep motivating yourself. And with producing a magazine, there's so many loose ends to that. If you get really bored with something, or if you get really stuck with a problem, you just sort of jump to something else. So when I couldn't figure out how to use InDesign, I was just going back to code and start on the website. Or if a contributor didn't get back to me, I started working on someone else's piece. So I guess there's not enough stuff that keeps you going. It's almost like you're wearing all these different hats in a company, so you always have something else to do if you get stuck somewhere. But yeah, keeping up that motivation and keeping up that momentum is super hard. And even now, after 5 issues, it's really exciting to launch an issue, because you get all this feedback coming in through Twitter and Facebook, and people receiving the issue is always great. But once you're over that, you know, now I'm at this low point where I think I launched issue number 5, but 5.5 weeks ago, or 6 weeks ago, and now all the feedback is dying off again. You know, now people have read or are reading it or have read it, and and the orders are slow, and it's just that point where you just have to pick yourself up and say, look, I know what it feels like to launch something. Let's do it again. Sorry, I'm not the best motivational advice person.
Hey, thank you. It was interesting to hear you describe that moment of powerlessness when you drop a 3 gig PDF on a server and there's nothing to change. I was wondering if it's got easier since as you've done more issues, that kind of like the difference between print and web that way, and if it has it changed the way you interact with digital products, like this kind of sense of finality and in dropping something or delivering something?
I don't think it has changed much. I think I still, and don't get me wrong, I still love, like, I got a Kindle and I read ebooks, and I spend a lot of time online reading stuff, and I'm a digital person, so I don't have anything against digital stuff. No, I don't think so. I appreciate print products more for what they are. I guess creating that final file and exporting it and sending it to the printer is still really difficult, and you get more professional about it. So you know that you have to have more people looking over it, and I hope that with every single issue there's more less typos and less issues in it. But I think, I don't know, it's still a weird moment to actually export a massive file and think that that's final. And sometimes I really miss being in digital, where you can actually go in there and change things. With the fifth issue, I actually changed the paper type again, because what happened was that with the issue 4, they sent us new stock, and it's a massive pile of paper, and they sent us new stock, and they changed paper mills without telling us. So the paper mill moved from somewhere in Spain to somewhere in Denmark, and the quality, the actual consistency of the paper was really bad. So some of the prints didn't turn out as well as I wanted it to. And so there was a massive drama going on in the background with me figuring out whether I should reprint everything on a different paper. And so we didn't, and we actually looked at new stock for issue number 5. And why I'm telling you this is I had to actually make up my mind about new stock, and it took me about 4 weeks to actually just make a decision, because you're looking at, you're buying I don't know how many tons of paper. And so making that decision and it being so final and having so much impact on the next few issues. So you're ordering paper for 5 issues in advance. That's when I hate producing a final, like a real magazine that's final. That's when I love and cherish the time I spent online producing something in digital, where you can just make changes as you go. So it probably wasn't a good answer to the question.
All right, thanks, Kai.
Thank you. Stop, hang on. Before you clap, use your hands, grab under your seat. There might be a little bookmark like that. Check it. Yeah.
Prize time.
If you got one, come up and see me afterwards. I'll give you... Oh,
we got them right here.
You can grab a free issue.
Come up and get an issue if you got a bookmark.
Thanks, guys.